Mr. McGee, are you ready to call the next Crown witness?
I am, my lord. The next witness is Dr. Gerald Sprinter.
Now, would you hand the witness the book, and then we'll just hand it to him, and we'll deem that him been sworn after that point.
Dr. Gerald Sprinter.
My lord, I intend to offer this witness to the court as a medical doctor expert in the field of pathology. And I would like to, with my friend's permission, lead him through some of his qualifications, if I might.
I have no objections whatsoever, my lord. In fact, this doctor is well known to everyone, certainly in this community, as an expert, and I'm prepared to admit that he's an expert in the field of pathology, if that'll assist my friend.
Well, Mr. McGee, if you're prepared to accept that admission, very well. On the other hand, if you wish to go through the doctor's qualifications, you're free to do so as you choose.
All right. I thank my friend, Mr. Bynoe, my lord, but perhaps in view of the fact that we have a jury here, I should go through the qualifications for their benefit. Now, Doctor, you graduated from the University of Western Ontario in 1950 with a degree in medicine?
That is correct, my lord.
And I understand you did postgraduate work in the field of pathology at the University of Toronto?
I did.
And you were certified by the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada in 1957 as a pathologist?
That is correct.
And I understand that you are, of course, presently licensed to practice medicine in the province of Ontario.
I am.
And you are authorized by the Attorney General of this province to perform medical legal autopsies.
That is correct.
And I understand you have given evidence in courts before, and those courts would include the Supreme Court of Ontario, as an expert in pathology.
That is correct.
Doctor, what is the science of pathology?
It's a study of the cause, nature, and effect of disease on the body.
All right. Now, as I indicated, I offer this witness to the court as an expert, my lord. My friend, I assume, has admitted his qualifications. There's no need for cross-examination at this point.
Do you wish to cross-examine the doctor, Mr. Bynoe?
Not at this time, my lord.
Well, Mr. McGee?
Yes, thank you, my lord. My friend has indicated, my lord, that he has no objection if I lead the doctor through a number of extraneous matters prior to getting into the meat of his evidence. Now, doctor, I understand that you did a autopsy on the deceased man here, one Bruce Carl Leaks. Is that correct?
That is correct. May
And,
I refer to my notes, my lord?
Yes, doctor. If you have some notes that you made, you may refer to them.
When did you do that autopsy, doctor, and where?
At the Woodstock Hospital on the 28th of December, 1971.
And I understand that the deceased Bruce Carl Leaks was identified to you by whom?
Detective Andrews.
Detective Andrews
Yes,
of the Woodstock Police Force?
of the Woodstock Police Force.
And my friend has indicated to me, my lord, that he is prepared to admit the identification of the body and that the person upon whom the autopsy was performed was the person named in the indictment before the court.
Is that so, Mr. Bynoe?
That is correct, my lord.
Now, doctor, who was present during the autopsy?
Sergeant Reddy.
All right. And I understand that you measured and weighed the body?
I did, my lord.
And what was the height and weight of the body?
The body was 5 foot 8 inches in height and weighed 160 pounds.
And moving down to another area of your report, notably the skin, I understand you noted that there were no needle marks on the veins. Is that correct?
That is correct, my lord.
You did prepare a report on this matter. Is that correct, doctor?
I did, my lord.
I have a copy of that report here, my lord. I wonder if I might file that as an exhibit.
Mr. Bynoe, do you have any objections to
I have
the
no
pathologist
objections.
report? You have a copy?
I have a copy, my lord, and I have no objections to it being filed as an exhibit in this matter.
Registrar, may we please have that as the next exhibit then? Thank you.
Now, Doctor, I understand that you noted 3 injuries to the body. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And 2 of those are of substantial significance, and 1 is not of any particular significance in this matter. Is that correct?
With regard to lethal lesions, yes.
Yes. Now, the first injury that you noted, Doctor, was an injury to the chest. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What type of an injury was that?
A gunshot wound,
It was a gunshot wound?
it was.
And could you show the court, please, the course of that wound, where it entered the body, and where it went after it entered the body?
The first one entered the body on the right side of the chest to the right of the midline between the 5th and the 6th ribs, described a course obliquely backwards and to the left, and came to rest between the 9th and 10th ribs at the back.
You're indicating on yourself there that the wound appeared to enter just below the right nipple
That is correct.
and went in a straight course to the back.
Well, on an angle,
angle.
towards the left and backwards.
All right. Would the bullet, in your opinion, have hit any bone upon entry of the body?
It did just tip the top of the 6th rib on the way in.
In your opinion, did it change the course of the bullet, that tipping of the rib?
It could have, but it did not appear to have.
All right. Would that wound have been consistent with a gun having been leveled at the deceased and fired from a distance of a few feet?
It's consistent with that, yes.
All right. Now, I understand there was clothing on this body. Is that correct?
The body was fully clothed.
And I understand that you noted a black leather coat.
Yes,
And there was a hole in that coat.
there was a bullet hole on the right side.
All right. And there was also a shirt.
Yes.
And did it also have a hole in it?
It had a bullet hole through it as
It
well.
had a bullet hole through it. And would the location of that clothing and the location of the entry wound of this bullet have matched up, so to speak?
They corresponded exactly.
All right. Were there any burns around the entry wound?
Well, a burn in the sense of a scrape. There is an expression in medicine, a brush burn, which means a scrape where the superficial layers of the skin are rolled or peeled off. And when a bullet enters the skin, the same thing happens, just around the margins of the wound of entry.
All right. And if there were no marks or powder marks on the clothing, would this burn still exist on the skin?
Yes,
In your
no.
opinion? It would. Now, Doctor, I understand you noted another wound in the chin of the deceased. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Which way did that wound go?
It entered the chin, or the skin of the chin, just to the left of the midline, went upwards and to the left, and came out in the lower lip.
All right. And was that wound of any significance so far as the deceased was concerned?
It would not be life-endangering, no, my lord.
All right. Now, I understand you noted another injury on the head of the deceased.
That is correct.
Where was that injury?
At the top of the head, just to the left of the midline at the back.
You're indicating at the back of the head, just above the ear on the left side. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in your opinion, which way did that, was that again consistent with a bullet wound?
That was a bullet wound.
It was a bullet wound. And in your opinion, which way did the bullet travel after entering the head at that point?
The bullet traveled downwards and forwards.
All right. Now, going back to the first wound that we've described, the one to the chest, what damage did you see that bullet wound having done?
As the bullet proceeded through the chest, it went through the heart, injuring both sides, both right and left sides of the heart, and the septum between the two sides, as well as sac around the heart, the pericardial sac, and through the lower lobe of the left lung.
Now, how long, in your opinion, after that wound was delivered, would this person have lived?
That would be speculative, my lord.
Would he have, let me put a hypothetical situation to you, assuming that this person was shot in this fashion through the heart, would he have been able to run down or walk down some 2 flights of stairs?
Oh, certainly.
He would have been.
Yes.
All right. Now, supposing he had done that, and after reaching the bottom of these stairs, had fallen on the ground, and assume that a second shot was delivered to the head, that is, the shot that you've described as being at the back of the head.
Yeah.
What would the effect of that shot have been on him?
Are we assuming that he's alive?
Assume that he's alive, yes. Would he be alive after receiving the shot through the chest and going down the stairs?
Oh, he could be alive, yes.
All right. Assuming then that he is alive at that point and he receives the second shot to the back of the head, what, in your opinion, would be the result of that?
Well, it would certainly be harmful.
Would it, in your opinion, the shot to the back of the head accelerate his demise or not?
I would think it would accelerate his demise.
All right. What did you find as the cause of death in this matter, Doctor?
In the passage of the bullet through the chest, in the tearing of the heart, he had a massive hemorrhage. There was 3,000 cc's of blood in the chest. This in itself is inconsistent with survival.
All right. Now, I note in your report that you discovered in the internal examination some 3,000 milliliters of blood in the left pleural cavity and in the pericardial sac. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the pleural cavity?
The pleural cavity is the lining of the chest and the covering of between the lining of the chest and the covering of the lung.
All right. And the pericardial sac, what is that?
It's a small, similar type sac that surrounds the heart.
All right. And would the presence of 3,000 milliliters of blood in those areas, would that have been caused, in your opinion, by the bullet wound to the heart?
It was caused by the bullet wound.
In the normal body, how many milliliters of blood are there?
Between 5,000 and 6,000 cc's or milliliters.
So the amount of blood in this area would be from a half to 3/5 of the blood supply.
That's correct.
Now, the injury to the head that you've described, Doctor, would it have been consistent with the deceased having been on the ground and having a bullet shot at him while he was on the ground from the back?
Yes.
Fine, thank you, Doctor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Bynoe?
Lord. Doctor, you're employed by the Attorney General.
No, my lord.
I understood you in response to my friend's questioning to indicate that you had some type of retainer from or authorization from the Attorney General.
I do, my lord.
Well, then you don't consider him one of your employers.
I do not, my lord.
I see. But he pays you for the services you rendered.
That is correct.
You were paid for the services you rendered in this particular matter,
I was, my lord.
and you're paid by the Attorney General of Ontario.
That is correct.
Now, it's the same Attorney General, I suppose, that employs my learned friend here, the Crown Counsel.
I assume it is, my lord.
I see, fine. Well, now, as I understand your evidence, Doctor, you state there were 3 gunshot wounds to the body of the deceased. Is that correct?
That is correct.
First is a bullet wound to the chest that pierced the heart. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Second was a bullet wound to the head. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the third you mentioned is a wound to the point of the chin.
Correct.
Now, if I may, I'd like to direct your attention to this wound to the chin. I'd like you to assume the following: that the weapon involved in this matter is a 9-shot Western type 22 caliber revolver. Assume further that 1 shot was fired into the deceased's chest. 1 shot was fired into the head of a second man. 1 shot was fired out the window and into the ground. 1 shot was fired into the floor on the second floor landing. And 1 shot was fired into the head of the deceased. Assume further that 5 .22 caliber long rifled fired cartridge cases were found. Assume further that 4 live .22 caliber bullets were still in the revolver when it was turned over to the police. And from the above, assume that it has been established that only 2 bullets from the weapon in question entered the body of the deceased. Further assume that you were possessed of that knowledge when you were examining the 0.8 by 0.5 centimeter hole in the chin of the deceased. Now my question is, Doctor, if you were possessed of that knowledge at the time you were examining that bullet hole, as you've described it, that wound to the chin, would you still be of the opinion that it was a bullet wound?
I would, my lord.
I note that the size of the bullet wound in the chest measured 1.3 by 0.9 centimeters. That is almost twice as big as the chin wound. Is that correct?
Yes.
I also notice that the head wound measurement is again 1.3 by 1.2 centimeters.
Correct.
Now it appears then as if we have 2 instances where we have 1.3 against 0.8, and then we have 0.9 and 1.2 centimeters against 0.5 again. Do you still believe that the wound to the chin was caused by a gunshot wound?
I do, my lord.
I note in the postmortem report on page 1, under the heading External Marks of Violence, item 2, re-wound to the chin, it states that there is a burn surrounding it. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
And you cut out that portion of the chin tissue for the purpose of having it tested. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that the lab test reveals no evidence of close-range firearm discharge residue was found in the chin tissue?
Correct.
Now, doctor, I'm going to ask you once again to assume the following. Assume that the evidence establishes that the weapon in question here fired only 2 shells into the deceased. Secondly, that the known bullet wound measurements with respect to the chest and the head are almost twice the size of what you say is the entry hole under the chin, and that no evidence of discharge residue was found in the skin tissue. Now, the question is, doctor, assuming those facts, had you had that knowledge at the time you first examined the hole under the chin, would you still be of the opinion that it was a bullet wound?
I am of the opinion that that wound was a bullet wound.
Of what caliber?
A small caliber,
22 caliber?
consistent with.
Well, how is it that if it is the same caliber shell and bullet that entered the chest and that entered the head and caused a 1.3 opening, that with respect to underneath the chin, it only caused 0.5 opening.
There are no rules determining the size and shape of a skin wound from
Is it just a coincidence then that the two other ones, the one in the chest and the one in the head, happen to have the identical entry measurements?
Yes.
Coincidence.
Yes.
Tell me, is your view that the hole under the chin is a gunshot wound due to the fact that you observe some burning around the entry?
Yeah, it is, my lord.
Well, it certainly wasn't residue from the gunshot. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What caused the burning?
As a missile enters the skin, particularly one fired from a rifled weapon, the missile is spinning at a high rate of speed, and as it goes through the skin, it scrapes the edges of the skin and leaves this type of injury, which I referred to as a burn.
Well, is it lead particles then that show up under the chin as a burn?
There should be lead residue, yes.
Well, Doctor, would it surprise you to learn that the Attorney General's Department, when they had the forensic laboratory examine the bullets that were in the gun, the casings that were outside the gun, and the finding at page 54 in the brief was that the bullets were all copper plated and luballoy, and they weren't lead at all?
I stand corrected, my lord. What I meant was metallic.
Oh, that's what you meant. And then you meant bullet hole because of the burn.
I did.
Tell me, are you still of the opinion then that chin hole is a bullet hole? Is that right?
That's right.
Well, now, you've heard the various factors that we have brought out, some 5 in number. Tell me, Doctor, is there anything that would make you change your opinion that the hole under the chin was a bullet hole? Anything?
If an injury of this nature could have been caused by a similar metallic spike that was shoved in at a fair rate of speed and rotated as it went through.
Well, any sharp instrument that rotated, you say, on the way through. Is that correct?
Almost any sharp instrument.
The bullet was never found, was it, that you related to that particular wound?
I do not know of my own knowledge of it having been found.
Now then, with respect to the matter of whether Mr. Leeks was alive or not at the time he received the second wound to the head, I believe that you have, by inference, indicated that it was your opinion that this man was alive at the time the second injury was sustained to the head. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What do you mean by dead?
It is a situation in a body where I, as a physician, am unable to detect pulse, heart rate, blood pressure, reflexes of any kind, respiration.
You therefore, if you could not find those present, even though perhaps you could detect some brain activity by an EEG or something, you would still consider that person dead, would you?
Yes, my lord.
Now, with respect to a person who has sustained an injury such as the heart injury that you've previously described, and that person was lying on the floor close to a door, and persons were moving over that body as it lay there, and the door was open, applying some force to the body. If it appeared as if a groan emanated from the body, would that, in your view, necessarily be a sign that there was life in the body?
No, my lord.
I'd like to go to the bullet wound to the chest. As I understand your evidence, it went right through the heart. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, in layman's terms, how big was the hole in the heart?
In layman's terms, about the size of my little finger.
You could shove your finger right through it. Is that right?
Yes, my lord.
That's a substantial hole. Is that correct?
It is.
And is there some division of the heart that divides it into compartments?
Yes, the heart's composed of 4 separate chambers.
Yes, and is there one in the middle that divides it?
The one, yes,
And what is that called?
the septum.
And was there a hole in the septum of this size?
Yes, there was, my lord.
Well, is it fair to say then, Doctor, as far as you're concerned, that unless this injury was sustained by a person right in the emergency ward of some university hospital, there was no chance that the man would survive?
I would be doubtful if it had occurred in the emergency ward of the best hospital that he could have survived.
That's the degree of severity of that wound. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And am I correct that you certified that, in your opinion, the cause of death was exsanguination due to the bullet wound piercing the heart?
That is correct.
Now, with respect to the bullet wound to the back of the head, Doctor, are you familiar with the text of Taylor's Principles and Practice of Medicine?
I am, my lord.
And is that a recognized authoritative text?
It's somewhat out of date now, but it is a recognized text.
Yes. And that is edited, is it, by Keith Simpson?
That is correct.
And Dr. Simpson is a world-renowned, recognized authority in pathology. Do you agree?
I would agree.
At page 81 of the Volume 1, the 12th edition, we find the following. Post-mortem bleeding is the heading. And it reads, after death, the heart having ceased to beat, the blood lies in blood vessels in a stagnant condition, and under normal circumstances remains for a time in a fluid state. In these circumstances, a blood vessel which has been opened after death may bleed post-mortem and give rise to suspicion that the wound was produced before death. Such an extravasation of blood post-mortem may, of course, spread into the tissue spaces or body cavities, especially where these have been loosened or stripped by process of dissection. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree with that statement.
Are you familiar with the text entitled Forensic Medicine by Keith Simpson?
I am, my lord.
It's the same Dr. Simpson?
Yes.
I'd like you to listen to this and see if you acknowledge the accuracy thereof and if you would adopt the statement. At page 16, under the heading Changes After Death. After some discussion with respect to other changes, Dr. Simpson goes on halfway down the page. It is fair to add, nevertheless, that when injuries occur closely at or about the time of death, it may be impossible to say whether they occurred just before, at, or about the time of death. An opinion that they took place, quotes, at about the time of death, close quotes, is the most that can be safely offered. The blood remains fluid for some time, indeed may never clot at all, and may percolate into spaces opened up by injury at or after death. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Doctor, do you know Dr. Jaffe?
Fred Jaffe?
Yes.
Yes, my lord.
And he is now the pathologist at Queenway General Hospital, but formerly he was the medical director of the Center of Forensic Sciences, the province of Ontario. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I'm going to read to you a statement of the learned doctors that is recorded in the Criminal Law Quarterly, Volume 17, Number 2, March 1975 edition, at page 192. And the heading under which this matter is being discussed is the medical legal post-mortem examination. And at the top of page 192 is this statement. The old belief that pre-mortem wounds bleed while those sustained after death do not is an oversimplification which has led to serious error in the past. Only 3 conditions are necessary for bleeding. That is, for an escape of blood into the tissues to occur. These are the presence of fluid blood in a blood vessel, a break in that vessel, and a pressure gradient from the lumen of the blood to the tissues. Do you agree with that statement?
I do.
Now, doctor, with respect to the wound to the head, how were you able to observe the bleeding?
There was more blood over the surface of the brain than the sagittal sinus, which was torn, could have contained.
But how did you see that, doctor? What did you have to do?
The sagittal sinus is a small vein.
Yes. But when you look at a picture of this man, and we have some pictures here at the time he was observed and found at the bottom of the stairs, you can't see any blood.
I'm talking about blood over the surface of the brain.
Well, doctor, didn't you have to get some kind of a saw and saw across the top of this man's head and then pull it back to take a look at what was there?
This is routine at postmortem, yes.
But surely some force had to be applied at that time.
Considerable force.
And bearing in mind the statements that we've just read that you agreed with, are you able to tell me how much of the blood that you observed was caused after death?
I'm not able to state in any given amount, no.
But it was from the amount of blood that you saw that you based your opinion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, isn't it a fact, doctor, that there is no scientific way that you can satisfy yourself beyond a reasonable doubt that the second shot to the head accelerated the death of this man at all?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. McGee, do you have any re-examination of the witness?
No, my lord.
Thank you, doctor. Just one question, doctor. Would you describe the injury caused by the bullet wound in the chest? Would you describe that as a disease or a disorder?
A disease, my lord.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, doctor, would you come up and have a chair, and Mr. McGee and Mr. Bynoe likewise? Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, now, let's ask a question. Mr. McGee, is it your usual practice, or was it unusual here, that you tendered the pathologist report?
I usually try and tender the pathologist's report. I find a number of your lordship's colleagues on the bench, however, don't like the report being entered as an exhibit. They may wish to see a copy of it to sort of follow the doctor's evidence, but there is a certain element on the bench that don't like the reports being entered as exhibits. They would rather hear it, so to speak, from the horse's mouth, and but I usually do try and tender it as an exhibit in court, because I think it assists the jury and certainly the judge.
Mr. Bynoe, was your position today usual or normal with regard to consenting the pathologist's report?
Depends on every case and the facts of the case. If there's anything in it that's really bad, there's no way that I'm going to permit it in. I want to have the evidence viva voce, and I want them to remember the evidence as it was given, subject to whatever qualifications or watering down could be accomplished by cross-examination.
Doctor, you have been a pathologist for many years, and could you tell us more or less how many post-mortem examinations you've done?
I've either done personally or personally supervised around 17,000.
Do you have any live clients?
Doctor, could you tell us in an average year how many times you testify in homicide cases?
Not very often now, 4 or 5 times a year.
We have here those who are for the Crown and those who are for the accused. Perhaps you could just tell us some of the things that bother pathologists about being witnesses. Any logistics problems that you have found?
Occasionally, I will accept the argument of the Crown that they are busy and that they don't always know exactly when one will be called as a witness. But I have on several occasions waited, I think, an undue length of time to be called. I do have another job as well.
You're not the sole retainer to the Attorney General, as Mr. Bynoe would have us believe.
No, my lord. One other thing, if I could, I don't like this form that's been talked about, the postmortem report. It is a form printed by the Solicitor General's Department. I think it's a badly composed form, but it is the one that we are required to use. It has incorrect information on it to begin with, and I would rather give evidence by mouth rather than have my report submitted. I don't want to be put into the position of defending incorrect statements which are printed on the back of this thing. The weights and sizes of these organs are not correct.
That's the printed on the form.
Yes. And I have been cross-examined.
But as far as putting into evidence as an exhibit what you yourself have signed, do you have any objection to that?
No strong objection, no more.
Mr. McGee, what do you say as to the tactics of calling the pathologists at the start of the case, in the middle, or at the end of the Crown's case?
Well, again here, my lord, it depends on the pathologist. As Dr. MacDonald has pointed out, they are very busy men, and it's sometimes difficult to get them into court just when you want them there. I have tended lately to try and call the pathologist at the end of the Crown's case. It tends to bring it home to the jury at the end of the case, just what they're dealing with, and he quite often can round up a number of theories that have been presented through various witnesses and deal with them at that time. But again, it depends on just when he's available.
Mr. Bynoe, from your standpoint, when do you like to see the pathologist called?
Well, I really feel that I shouldn't divulge that information to the Crown. However, I think in most cases it's immaterial. In some cases, I think the defense would appreciate having the pathologist called last, because there may very well arise during the course of the trial a medical legal issue that could be pursued through the pathologist. It would be of advantage to the defense.
How often do you think it's necessary from the standpoint of the defense, or how often would you like to have a meeting with, say, the Crown and the pathologist prior to the trial? Would you like to see that?
I think it would be very helpful.
The reason I mention that is we met last night and we talked about it, and Dr. McDonald said to me on more than one occasion how much he would like to meet.
Well, I think it clears the air in most cases. The pathologist knows the defense counsel, and he knows the areas he's going to be questioned in. And not only that, the pathologist, being an expert, normally would not be a biased witness, and you would hope that he would volunteer evidence that was favorable to the defense and divulge it. And in addition, you would know exactly what he meant, because if he said on the balance of probabilities or possibilities or something, you'd be able to have in an informal discussion to query exactly what the doctor meant by that statement and clear up any ambiguity. And you would know where you were at, and the doctor would know where you're at. And not only that, the evidence he gives to the jury would be accurate, and it would not be misinterpreted.
Doctor, we all know how lawyers prepare for a trial. Does the expert witness, the pathologist, does he do some preparation before he comes down as well?
Yes, my lord.
Could you tell us what sort of thing you would do?
Well, I go over the case and pick out points that I think could be contentious, or pick up things that I am sure I'm going to be questioned on. And one of the questions in this case, the most obvious one, would be how long could a man survive, or what sort of physical activity could he indulge in after a wound of that severity. And there is a lot of literature on this subject, and there's a lot of variation in the amount of activity that can go on. I think the record is one gunshot wound through the heart, after which a man ran 3 miles.
Does the Mr. McGee, is it usual to in this day and age to call the pathologist at the preliminary hearing, or is it what's the situation?
I would say in about 50% of the cases in Toronto, the pathologist is called at the preliminary hearing. I must say we've got, over the recent years, a little sloppy with pathologist evidence, because usually it's admitted substantially by the defense counsel. His qualifications are admitted. You tend to slough over things like that, and we shouldn't. But I would agree with Mr. Bynoe that in an important case, it might be very good to sit down with, both counsels sit down with the pathologist and go over his evidence with him, provided, of course, the defense produces their experts at this time and gives the Crown an opportunity to discuss the case with them as well.
Mr. Bynoe, have you ever had a pathologist's evidence from a preliminary and the pathologist's report and gone and consulted a pathologist of your own with regard to the Crown's evidence?
Only on one occasion.
Did you?
And I had grave doubts that the opinion that was being expressed, not the facts or the basis of it, but just the opinion, was perhaps as reliable as I would like to have thought it would have been. And on consulting another pathologist, I obtained quite a contrary view. Before the trial, I presented the view to the Crown attorney, who I understand called the pathologist up, presented the other point of view, and was advised by the Crown attorney that the original opinion given would be modified at trial to comply with the second opinion that I'd received.
Did you call the pathologist as a witness, or?
No, the Crown's own witness brought it out. I didn't want to have to call evidence.
Doctor, we heard the other day in the Mr. Maloney's speech that opened up this seminar that he read from Mr. Martin's cross-examination of Dr. Keith Simpson, who was mentioned this morning, and it was dealing with the time of death. This seems to be a matter that arises quite frequently. Can you give us something we should look for or watch for when we hear the question, Doctor, can you give us the time of death of the deceased? Is there some criteria that's involved here?
The only one I would accept is a reliable eyewitness.
All right. From the pathologist standpoint, is there any sure way to ascertain the time of death?
No, my lord. There is no accurate way.
And how far or what range can you put it within?
Well, it would vary from case to case. And you have to know the surroundings, and you have to know what's happened to the body between the time death occurred and the time you do the postmortem, and very often you don't know. Such things as body cooling, if you have a controlled atmosphere in an average person and take repeated body temperature measurements along with measurements of the atmospheric temperature, it's fairly reliable. But you never have that set up. Bodies found out on the road, you very often don't know what the temperature was out on the road. The body's taken to the city morgue and put in a fridge, which is 4 degrees centigrade. You do the postmortem 12 hours later. The body temperature should be the temperature of the fridge, but it very often isn't. They're just not reliable.
Well, from your standpoint, when you're asked the question, can you give me the approximate time of death, what do you answer to that question?
It would be only approximate.
Would you make the approximation within, 12 hours or 15? Or?
It should be possible, if you do the postmortem within the first 24 hours, to be closer than 12 hours, say 6.
So, my lord.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.